Good morning, everybody. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint because it's too early in the morning for me to try to influence you to look at charts and graphs. I'm basically going to speak a few points about how the importance of funding, because looking at the Global Advocacy Agenda, you will understand that nothing will be possible where there is no money involved. You will have no money for treatment, no money for advocacy, no money for core costs for funding your organizations that do the lobbying and the work. So over the past few years, the Global Fund Advocates Network, which is GFATM, we have a networking zone downstairs, has worked very hard to actually raise money for the Global Fund in terms of replenishment. The Global Fund, as you know, is one of the highest multilateral and the highest donor towards HIV funding in prevention, treatment, care, and support. I won't bore you with the statistics. Roughly, there is about a 2.6 to 3 billion gap for countries, even though we've raised about 15 billion for the last replenishment period for the Global Fund. This loosely translates into the fact that when the Global Fund cancelled round 11 in 2011, and that we've moved from a demand-driven model, which means that countries could ask for what they needed to do the work that they wanted in country, to a model which now means that here is a pot of money, you fill it up to do what you need to do, but you only have this much money to do your programming. That has caused a lot of issues in countries, as some of you would actually know, about how priorities are decided in country. Even though the Global Fund has advocated or that a country dialogue in country needs to take place, it doesn't always have involvement of PLHIV or active involvement of people that actually can sit at table with an equal say in discussing what needs to go in terms of priorities. So loosely, the new funding model has a few certain restrictions. So even though we've looked at how development aid in general has reached the highest level ever in 2013 with 134.8 billion, is actually slowly decreasing in countries, especially towards bilateral aid. You would know that PEPFAR, DFAT, DFID have started pulling out in a lot of countries. The Global Fund stopped funding China for very valid reasons, and donors are starting to look at not funding the next big country in Asia that has a space program. So those restrictions will mean that those basically mean, because when countries move up income levels, they're no longer eligible for Global Fund funding. That has many impacts, because we do not. Just because a country is rich, we know very well that that doesn't mean that we will actually be able to sustain our programs, because countries do not fund programs, especially for people living with HIV, people that work in sex workers networks or MSM programs. So I'll move very quickly to a couple of key points around what's going on around the Global Fund in terms of the transition issue, because when I talked about how the Global Fund now looks at how countries are eligible, we talk about how we talk only about disease burden and your GNI per capita. It's a lot to absorb sometimes. It's very mathematical, and it's very economically driven, which means that countries that actually have more disease burden, have a lower income level for GNI, get more money. This places a lot of countries that are, for example, middle income, with very small pots of money for their programming. The governments are also expected to put in counterpart financing, so that to be eligible for the funding from the Global Fund. We know that traditional donor aid is fast becoming not practical. I would actually say that the approaches that we have as communities can sometimes be wrong, because we work in very constrained and restrained environments. We So for example, at the Global Fund, we always try to lobby donors to give more money towards the Global Fund. Well, that is correct. Donors are coming back to us and telling us very, very honestly that donor aid is meant for the lowest income countries. The poorest countries are eligible for donor aid. I've had DFID said that to me in person, someone from DFID saying that we can no longer give money to to middle-income countries because that's what our capitals tell us. That's what your taxpayers, the taxpayers' money is meant for. You want to give money to the lowest income countries. But we know that the poorest of the poor and the most marginalized and criminalized populations are no longer just in low-income countries. They're the largest population now reside in middle-income countries. So just rounding that off very, very quickly, because Julian's telling me, yeah, I only have 1 more minute left. Is that there needs to be a lot more community mobilization around making sure that we raise enough resources. We need to also look at having a more active watchdogging role in country to actually lobby for more resources that will be sustainable at country level from domestic finances, from domestic financing. So I'll just round off with that.
Fabulous.
Thank you, Rachel. I think also what's important for us to understand in the context of the Global Advocacy Agenda is what is our role as communities in understanding the new funding model, and how do we engage with our governments in ensuring that they understand the new funding model and all of the parameters, X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C. So I think that's also very critical as we move this discussion along.